when you're seeing that kind of media awareness of the financial services sector having those IT outages, that's the time when you need to stay the most vigilant, because you will naturally see threat actors sending out phishing emails, making phone calls to be from that institution to help you make your payment. So it's an interesting time that we live in to both enable the innovation internally, but also to stay vigilant with what's happening in the market externally.
Welcome to the Digital Customer Comms podcast, where we discover how leading regulated companies engage, retain, and delight customers at scale. Today, we're tackling the biggest myths and mistakes in cybersecurity for regulated companies, the day-to-day of how to keep client communications safe without that unnecessary friction. We've got Chantal from NCC Group with us. She's got over a decade of experience in financial tech and cybersecurity, and she helps firms navigate risk and stay ahead of threats. Hi, Chantal.
Hey, Sam. Great to be here today.
Great to have you. So a lot of people still see cybersecurity as just for IT. How do we combat that? It's something that we've been trying to combat for years. How do businesses do better in making it everybody's responsibility and making everybody aware of that?
Well, you talked on to the classic challenge, Sam, of the difference between a thought around compliance and security as a culture that's bedded into an organisation. You're right, security is everyone's responsibility. And when you think about financial services, we're actually securing everyday people and everyday people's transactions. So when we're communicating in the financial services landscape, we need to be thinking security first in everything we do. So part of that's around staying vigilant, staying informed, and always prioritising the confidentiality and integrity of customer communications and having that front of mind rather than it being seen as a training exercise that happens every half year, for example.
I mean, there's a lot of tools that we can use these days for training. What's your opinion on the role of tools in training versus, humans on the ground doing the training? Do you need a balance of both? Which is better? Are there tools that you'd recommend?
So I think when it comes to cybersecurity training, like the interactivity of training, using examples, being able to work through, there's a lot of video-based gamification companies out there that do that compliance training. I think really understanding the impact of cybersecurity incidents and the impact that has on customers can be talked through by in-house teams often, and bringing that to life as part of that culture is really important. So I think it needs to be a diverse mix. It needs to be something that happens regularly. People need to be looking at, reporting phishing emails, for example. It's just common practice, not something they do when a colleague kind of alerts them that one of the emails in the inbox is a phishing email. So it's really that variety and the engagement that you need around security. And it's being a culture, not just it being something that is a training program from a compliance angle.
Because we've all been through these training programs. We've all been trained on cybersecurity. Most companies have to every year. But it's that, like you say, that engagement piece. And there's a difference between doing the training and having ticked a box and then, all the instances of human error, for example, that you still see. And obviously you can't eliminate those completely, but there are, I imagine, still risks and common instances of that human error that you see all the time, that even though people know they shouldn't be doing something, they're doing it anyway.
Exactly. And I think there's some common mistakes that professionals make, especially when you just think about email communication. So just sending sensitive information to the wrong recipients, we can do that internally, but when it actually happens externally from a customer communication perspective, just stopping, thinking, verifying that recipient information is really important. Forgetting to BCC rather than CC someone can breach client confidentiality when you think about that wealth management space where you've got a lot of person-to-person interaction happening there, not necessarily through platforms. And therefore, you've got challenges when you're failing to log out of, say, shared or public devices. So that ability to really be sure that you're using secure communication channels when you're communicating with your clients. But I think, Sam, that we work in cybersecurity. I don't think there's anyone that won't have clicked on a phishing link, a phishing campaign inside their own company. It's the stopping and thinking before you click that is so important. because we're in such a fast-paced environment, especially in financial services. It's that ability to have that sense check to stop and think before you click.
I've definitely done it. I think we all have, but that's why we've got these tools and these trainings that reinforce the habit, because it is a habitual thing, isn't it? You need to constantly be raising your awareness, because if you're not, then it's something that just goes to the back of your brain and you forget about it. It doesn't become second nature thinking about these things, especially with phishing, which we know is one of the main threats to organizations. We're talking there about things that people do even though they know they shouldn't. Are there things that people still get wrong? Some myths or things that people think they should be doing and they do, but aren't necessarily what they should be doing?
Yes. So I think what will be surprising, I think, to some of your listeners, still surprising to us here at NCC, is using weak or reused passwords, because it's simple, because we've got so many passwords to use for so many different devices. But it's similar to when you're using passwords for, password protected documents, for example. So the most common password in 2024 was 123456. Yeah. Used by 30% of users in certain instances in certain applications. So 123456 was the number one. The second one was password, all lowercase, for password protecting a document, for example. Often we see passwords actually embedded in the file name, so people know that the last word is actually the password in the file name. Passwords, file names that are, or passwords for files that are consistently used. So it's the same password, for example, for a client. So you have the same password for all that client's documentation. So once that password's broken, it's broken for everything that you've sent that client. So there's still some things that, just because you're using company email, for example, doesn't mean it's always secure. They can be intercepted, they can be spoofed, they can contain malicious payloads or malicious links. There's that kind of false comfort sometimes that your technology is going to protect you and therefore you don't need to be vigilant personally. That password protected documents, for example, are fully secure. We've already said, the manner in which they're shared, the manner in which the file names often can contain the passwords. That's something that's down to the individual to be vigilant around. And that things like deleting emails and messages removes all traces. That data can often be recovered from backups. So unless you're properly purging, according to your secure deletion protocols, you're going to find yourself falling foul if that's the type of activity you're relying on. I think the other piece is we talked around GDPR and the right on the individual to be responsible for the data that they're sharing. And it's actually believing that you can contact anyone, you can contact any customer. And under digital marketing rules and GDPR, we have to enforce opt-out requests. So actually a client can ask not to be contacted. So there are some common mistakes there that just because the data is available to you doesn't mean you can use it contacting a client.
So there's a couple of things there to pick out. If I'm an employee, whether I'm an employee at a large company or I'm a kind of even a small business, an IFA, for example, password management is obviously really important today. We've got, average of 120 passwords each or something. But we're given these tools. This is another kind of tool and training thing. We have access to all these tools and we all see, maybe when we're on our phone, the pop-up that says, do you want to save and fill this password? But password management is actually quite an active thing that you need to maintain as well. Do you feel there's been a kind of lack of training there, even though we all get given these tools? We might not necessarily know how to manage them.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I think technology can help you so far. As I said, there's a lot of password management, password generation tools out there that are really good to use in certain environments. I think it's up to individuals to actually almost have your own method of generating your own passwords, whether that be through the application you're using, the nature of the work you're doing, so that you are avoiding using that repetitive password for everything you personally interact with. And you have a way of changing your passwords to protect your personal and your client's data. So I think it's getting the right mix. And I think it goes back to the individual staying vigilant and not expecting the technology to be the sole protection layer that they need when communicating with customers.
in terms of the file management then. So if I want to get rid of a file, would you simply advise don't have files on your machine that you don't want on your machine or in the system? Or would you say, this is the way to purge a document, this is the way to purge a file, and to know that it's been deleted so that it's not recoverable?
So I think it depends the role that you're doing. And it also depends the organisation you're in. When you're thinking about financial services organisations, what you would do at home and what you would do to protect yourself in your own personal IT estate and how you communicate digitally is very different to what you're probably being asked to do inside your financial services institution. So the first port of call should always be your policies and procedures. It should always be your IT department. They are the ones that should guide you. And if you feel you've deleted a document you shouldn't have, or indeed that you do need to remove a document, rather than taking that onus on yourself, I would always say, look to your organisation's policies, procedures and the IT professionals to help you with that, because then you are also making others aware of the actions that you're taking. And that transparency is also a key to managing security inside an organisation.
Yeah, it must be hard even for your policies to keep up these days, because you've got AI, you've got deep fakes, and you've got new scams coming out all the time. So are there general principles that people can follow around, especially these new forms of phishing, deep fakes and AI based phishing, or is that just a case of you have to keep up?
I think you have to keep up. But I think, especially when we're thinking about deep fakes, we've got some anecdotal evidence in the financial services market of, executives being instructed on conference calls, on Teams channels, etc. And actually, it turns out that these board members were actually deep fakes. Yes, there are things, we're seeing constantly from a visual perspective, check the visuals, check hands, the things that we know are hard to replicate from a visual. But the other thing is looking for non-documented evidence to prove you know who it is you're talking to. So that ability, if it's internally, to be able to check information that isn't necessarily easily found in the public realm. So a communication where you're picking up with someone about what you've talked about previously, how many times you've communicated, what your last communication channel was, for example, rather than just relying on, date of birth and address data. So really trying to look for those shared knowledge, I would say, areas, not necessarily things that would be written down that are easy to verify.
People might feel quite awkward about asking questions like that, especially when it comes to, their CEO or their CISO even. Can you give us maybe an example of how you might go about that in an email thread or on a call where you would interject that kind of thing yourself?
So I would always say if you're contacted by your organisation by someone you're not aware of, you can always look to contact them back through your own organisation's secure channels. That's the same for anyone listening who is a consumer of financial services, yeah? That, your bank calls you, they want to verify information, you can always call your bank back. That is a perfectly acceptable way to engage with your bank. So it's being able to take control of that communication, I think, is really important. The other aspects are you have, town halls inside an organisation, you have award schemes, finding something that you can communicate to them about and reference that will check they understand the culture of the organisation is really important. That could be, CEOs often do updates. They will comment about something that's happened in the week. There is usually something whether it be a company event, whether it be an internal announcement, whether it be something about them personally that you can check to be able to verify that is the person you're talking to that's not necessarily publicly available information.
Do you think that there will be, in the consumer realm, we have these new ways of checking whether for example, your bank is on the phone to you at this time? In your app, it might say, we are on the phone to you right now, so that you can check. Do you think those kind of things will be leaking into the employer-employee realm for those larger organisations?
I think, we can see that happening. I think, you've got various different communication channels already where we kind of verify passwords. Often that is done through a mobile device. I mean, NCC will two-factor authentication for everything. So, we take security very seriously. So I do think you'll start to see the same movement between devices that we see in our personal lives coming into the work channel as well. as we see them, successfully deployed in the public space. I think the most important thing, and I think that's been interesting around financial services, is customers starting to take ownership of their own data and being able to use that data to make decisions. So we've seen things like open banking come in the UK. And I think that's made customers very aware of data being exchanged, of schemes of protection that we've seen. When you think about confirmation of payee, when you pay between your mobile phone and you do like what they call a peer-to-peer payment, when you're paying a friend, it will often look to verify the name and it will say if it's a partial match or a full match. So there are definitely those mechanisms coming in to help you self-check before a transaction goes through. And I can definitely see those coming into corporate infrastructures as well.
As those things are evolving, you've also got the other side though, haven't you? You've got threats evolving as well. So beyond deepfakes and the phishing side of it, we all use, Slack or Teams or these kind of instant messaging channels that we maybe didn't use 5 years ago. We use these conferencing, I suppose we wouldn't call them conferencing tools anymore, video calling tools. Are there any emerging threats on these other channels that we should be worried about?
So I think these other channels are actually newer technologies. And when you think about the financial services landscape, a lot of financial services organisations will be working with a number of financial technology organisations called fintechs. And a lot of those have spun up in the last 5 to 10 years. They don't necessarily have all of that old IT, that legacy IT infrastructure that is a challenge to some of the more established players. So actually some of the newer technologies can actually have more robust and indeed more agile security capabilities around them. I think that actually some of those newer technologies can be more secure. What is interesting is the types of organisations that are looking to infiltrate financial services, the financial services sector, the sort of methods that they're looking to use. So when we think about environmental activism, we had a large environmental activist group explicitly looked to attack the insurance industry in October last year. So we're seeing new players come into the market looking to use different methods, both physical security breaches and cybersecurity breaches. So it's not just the types of attack, it's the threat actors are changing now to be able to use financial services as a high profile attack, a client, for example.
I think a lot of the large scale attacks that we've seen, or at least large scale disruptions, breaches that we've seen over the last year, have been a result of legacy technology. So I imagine when you work with clients, a lot of it really is about making sure that software is updated and systems are updated. And that's not an easy task when it comes to a huge bank or insurer. Can you talk a little to the challenges of that, how long these projects take, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so it's a really complex landscape. When you think about complexity of what they do and legacy systems, the history of the financial services industry plus the rate of change, it is one of the most complex but sophisticated users of technology. So in many respects, large scale transformations can last, years. But actually the ability to build security in at the beginning is where you get the best success. So that whole going back to the culture of security, built in, not bolted on, is critical when you're thinking about any IT transformation, and being able to design the right security principles up front that enable you to innovate is much better than having to mark the homework afterwards and bolt them on at the end. And then security actually becomes the challenge to enabling change. So that ability to be able to design security in from the outset and for security to enable that innovation is where we're seeing organisations have success. You also talked there, Sam, to some high profile IT challenges that the sector has. We've recently, as we're recording this podcast, only this morning, a large tier 1 bank was announcing a major IT outage. And the challenge is that provides the perfect cover for threat actors. It provides the perfect cover for threat actors to exploit employees of those institutions, but also the customers of those institutions. So going back to that security awareness, when you're seeing that kind of media awareness of the financial services sector having those IT outages, that's the time when you need to stay the most vigilant, because you will naturally see threat actors sending out phishing emails, making phone calls to be from that institution to help you make your payment. So it's an interesting time that we live in to both enable the innovation internally, but also to stay vigilant with what's happening in the market externally.
Can you paint a picture a little bit more for us of that targeting of specific industries, specific companies based on media or events, and how we've gone from this blanket approach, what we consider spam, traditional spam, to this much more targeted approach, and how AI might be coming in there as well?
So I think when you think about the threat actors that are out there, and we talk about hackers, I think in a lot of other people's minds, people think around, the teenagers sat at home behind their PCs looking to, competitively enter environments in IT. And I think the reality of where, the cybersecurity world is headed is those hackers are in large corporations now. They have a payroll, they have people who want promotions. And so it is a far more organised network than we've ever seen before. That means we're not looking at automated phishing emails being sent out. You've got individuals targeting individuals, undertaking corporate digital footprints, personal digital footprints, looking at their social media profiles and really engineering very specific attacks to those individuals. And so when you're in financial services institutions, what you're sharing online, what you're sharing in your media reports, if there's mergers and acquisitions being undertaken, that information is being used by those organisations to very specifically target either senior executives or indeed individuals within payments operations inside the organisations to be able to target those emails. When you're thinking about citizens, payment links are a natural part of everyday life at the moment. I've talked about that innovation that we've seen especially in retail banking over the last 5 to 10 years, where you've got digital payment providers providing you with links, payment platforms. They are very sophisticated now in how they target those emails to consumers. Often they will have all of the branding, copywriting at the bottom. So it's really being able to understand whether you expected that communication to be coming to you. And as I said again, having the right to challenge that communication. But it's very specific, it's very targeted. Your listeners need to understand that it is organised crime now as far as cybersecurity is concerned. And that, we need to be very vigilant to be able to protect against that.
And the big part about this is it's scary. And just like financial providers, for example, like pensions companies who might want to make people more aware of pensions, when we look to make people more aware of cybersecurity, because it's a scary big issue that isn't directly related to what I'm doing right now, we tend to stick our heads in the sand. What simple things can people do on a day-to-day basis right now to make sure that they're more secure or they're less vulnerable to these types of attacks, less vulnerable to being targeted?
Yeah, and you're right, Sam. And I think I wouldn't want anyone to leave this podcast thinking, it's all this fear, uncertainty and doubt that this industry, is great at conjuring. Financial services organisations are at the forefront of cybersecurity. They're engaging with some of the best technology in the market and the best providers. So for individuals engaging with financial services or employees, you are working with some of the most sophisticated cybersecurity tools at your disposal. But as a personal impact on what you can do, there's some pretty basics that you can follow. So we talked about relying on policies and understanding those policies to actually remove the burden from you having to come up with how you're going to protect yourself, and actually understanding how your organisation helps you to protect yourself and your clients' data. So understand, follow your company policies, do the training and do it so you can learn, not do it so you can tick the compliance box. Only use approved platforms and phones for communicating with your clients. Don't be tempted to switch to WhatsApp, personal messages. I know that it can be very personal in how we deliver customer experience in the financial services customer kind of journey, but absolutely must stay on top of using approved platforms. Encrypting sensitive communications is, a basic. Even more basic is don't ignore those software patches and updates that pop up that are really annoying, that happen just before the conference call, and you keep sort of delaying them. They're there for a reason. They're there because undoubtedly a vulnerability has been found somewhere, and they are updating that software onto your systems to protect you against it. So, make time for them, do them in a timely manner, and then, you're helping yourself and your organisation stay vigilant. But the most important thing that I can leave you with is to think before you click. The speed at which we operate often is where we fall foul to human error. So thinking before you click, reading that communication, and if you hesitate, you're hesitating for a reason. So think before you click.
It's really interesting. I've recently bought a new mouse, one that's a double-handed one, because I've got pain in one of my wrists, and I'm so slow with my mouse now. I thought it would slow down my work. It hasn't actually slowed me down at all. It's a bit more cumbersome to, it was initially to learn, but it's not about how fast you click, how fast you work, really. You think it is, but it's about how fast you actually work, how fast your brain's going and you're thinking and you're doing the work. I find that it actually helps me slow down, be more considerate about what I'm doing when I'm switching between tasks and things like that. That's been really useful for me. So there's maybe some element of slowing a positive experience from slowing down, as well as the security there.
Exactly. So hopefully less mistakes, Sam, in your world due to your maths.
I cannot guarantee that. Where can people find you if they want to chat or they need your help, or where can we find NCC Group?
So Sam, NCC can be found by Googling NCC Group, or please reach out to me, Chantal Constable. I'm head of our financial services business, and I am on LinkedIn under Chantal Constable, and we'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much for your time today, Chantal. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Sam. Take care.